Street Warrior is a side-scrolling beat-em-up, brawler-style game. It was released for the PlayStation 2 in 2007 and was published by Phoenix Games. And this game would take a lot of influence from classic side-scrolling beat-em-ups when you look at the likes of Streets of Rage, Golden Axe, among many others that would have been classics in the arcade and even on the likes of the Sega Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, even with games like Final Fight, and even more 3D entries seen on the likes of the PlayStation. Now this game, even though it uses kind of like side-scrolling elements, all of the elements and visuals are all in 3D. That again would become more noticeable in later games entry seen on more modern consoles at the time. So pretty much the goal, like with a lot of these games, is that you start off by picking a character and then the goal is to just keep completing levels by defeating all of the enemies in waves, and the goal then is to defeat the main boss at the end of each level and even the overall boss towards the end of the game, and takes a lot of inspiration from the likes of the Streets of Rage series where corrupt officials have taken over the city and then it's your goal to take them out of the equation. So you have to then fight loads of thugs from different gangs and kind of work your way up the ranks until you can defeat all of the bosses to take them out of the equation. But unlike those classic games, especially if you compare it to like earlier entries, well, especially with the likes of Streets of Rage 1 and more particularly Streets of Rage 2, which in my opinion is probably the best out and out side-scrolling beat 'em up of all time. And there are many others that definitely do really well, but this game unfortunately does not even come close to those games, even though it has 3D graphics, and it does have some decent enough visuals for the environments that you're in, but just the character animations and the combat moves and even the collision detection is very sluggish and it's very clunky, and the movesets themselves at times with the character and the animations can be quite unresponsive in most cases. You're literally hitting buttons for ages and not a lot is happening, and it can take ages sometimes to defeat enemies, and sometimes just things just happen. It's just weird. But then again, this is a budget game at the end of the day, so it's never going to be as well put together or polished compared to higher budget games as such. Like what it is trying to do, I can see the inspiration behind it and what it's trying to achieve, but it just isn't executed as well as it could have been. Now it does have some good ideas, but it's just it is poorly let down because of certain aspects, especially with the controls and just the playable features that's in the game. So with each level, now you don't go too far, like it is a side-scrolling beat 'em up, but you don't move too far throughout each of the levels. You're literally just fighting off waves that appear just at different stages, and the goal is just to defeat every single enemy in the level until you can progress to the next and then face off against end of level bosses. So you have to be mindful of your health because you only have a limited number of lives, and you can also increase your score, so you'll have different types of pickups that you can also gain access to along the way, like your typical side-scrolling beat 'em ups. So you can pick up like health kits, or you can pick up knives, even guns as well that you can use to take other opponents out of the equation. And a lot of these games, like I do love beat 'em ups, but a lot of these type of games, after a while, if you're not really too familiar with them and if you have played them for quite a while, you'll find in some cases that they can get quite repetitive. That's why they're probably best being played only in short doses or even just casually, because even when you look at the likes of the Streets of Rage games way back in the day, like the games themselves weren't overly long, and there's a good reason for that because the games themselves can get quite repetitive. Like even when you look at the more recent edition of the Streets of Rage series with Streets of Rage 4, now that is a really good example of a street brawler or side-scrolling beat 'em up done well, and the fact is it took elements from the original games and it still kept the same formula even though it updated the graphics. But that game is phenomenal in its own right, and it was one of the best games released in 2020, so it proves that formula still works, but only if it's executed correctly, which it was. But this game unfortunately doesn't have those elements, and now it is inspired by a lot of those classic games, but it's just poorly let down due to its limited controls, moves and just overall characteristics. You'll find that it will get repetitive very quickly, and it's just the collision detection and even some of the moves, it's just a lot of times the game is very unresponsive in terms of how it plays, and that will frustrate a lot of players. So it definitely misses the mark on a lot of different areas with regards to what it's trying to do. But it is a budget title after all. Like these games were never going to be considered exceptional. It is what it is pretty much at the end of the day, but they're never going to be as good as more mainstream games. Like if you do happen to pick this up for cheap in a bargain bin somewhere, then you can add it to your collection, but most people will probably end up avoiding it. But I would love to know your thoughts of Street Warrior for the PS2 and what what did you think of it if you have played it, or did you even know the game existed? Or are you a fan of old school style beat 'em ups that you would have seen on other consoles as well? So I'd love to know your thoughts on this game, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you have enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be updated with future videos. And if you would like to see more content around other types of beat 'em up games that were also released on the PS2, then you can check out the playlist on screen to see more of those games in action. And I will see you all in the next one.